Resuming debate, the honourable member for Sturgeon River. Oh, Parkland. Sturgeon River's Parkland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise to continue debate over Bill C-2, the government's inaugural post-election spending bill targeted to support businesses and those impacted by COVID-19 lockdowns. This $7.4 billion piece of legislation may seem like a drop in the bucket compared to the spending that was approved in the last Parliament, but we know that our nation's finances are increasingly in precarious shape. As we seek to navigate our way out of this pandemic, the responsibility that we have as parliamentarians to do our due diligence is vital to our recovery. There are many examples from the previous Parliament on why it is so essential to do our due diligence and ensure that this and other spending bills are providing targeted support to precisely the sectors that need it the most. The fact is that in the last Parliament, billions of dollars in taxpayer funds were needlessly directed to otherwise profitable businesses in the form of wage subsidies and other subsidies. In fact, even in 2020, with the carnage of the March onward COVID-19 lockdowns, the TSX, the Toronto Stock Exchange, was still able to post a modest gain of over 2%. In 2021 alone, year to date, with wage subsidies and other subsidies in place, the TSX has grown by over 20%, dwarfing the 10-year annual return of around 6%. It is abundantly clear that both the fiscal stimulus provided by the Liberal government through taxpayer resources and debt financed by those taxpayers, along with the unprecedented amount of quantitative easing from our central bank, have significantly propped up the returns of Canada's biggest businesses. These same factors have also led to a massive rise in inflation that is unrivaled in most of the developed world. The price of housing in some parts of Canada has skyrocketed to all-time highs, with prices in Ontario jumping between 20 to 35% this year alone. Now, it's no wonder that so many people in my generation, the millennial generation, and following generations will have to wait years longer, if ever, than previous generations to own our very first home. Those millennials who are fortunate enough to be able to purchase their first home are often doing so through the generous gifts from their parents or their grandparents. Otherwise, they're often leveraging themselves to the hilt, sometimes by 20 times, just to afford a modest townhome in the suburbs. We know that this is unsustainable. We know that interest rates are going to increase, making the cost of servicing that massive mortgage debt for young families more and more unaffordable. And we know that the government, while trying to get families into their first overpriced home, will do nothing or little to avert or mitigate the carnage we will see when mortgage rates reset over the next few years. Now, if increasing the price of housing wasn't bad enough, the increases to other essentials for families due to inflation and flawed government policies will also contribute to major economic problems for Canadian families. The price of inputs into agricultural production are growing fast. The price of fertilizer, fuel, the cost of drying grain due to the carbon taxes, clean fuel standards, and now inflation threaten to make all food products less affordable for families. The price of a pound of bacon is up over 20% since January 2020. And that's just one example from hundreds where food prices are going up. Consumers are getting big cost increases, while the government, the central bank, and the big producers pass along the costs. Now, sadly, many of the farmers that I know and have the honor of representing, especially the cattle ranchers, are not benefiting from these cost increases. While beef at the grocery store may be up 20% since the beginning of 2020, the price of a head of beef cattle has only gone up by 2.7% since 2017. It's not the farmers who are getting rich off of this government's inflation. Now, across Canada, we also see that there are over 1 million job vacancies. This labour shortage affects all regions of Canada, and it persists in all sectors of the economy. Supporting Canadians in need was the right thing to do, and it always will be. And that is why Conservatives supported help for Canadians who were prevented from working due to the COVID-19 lockdowns. However, we cannot continue to support people to not work while our economy is open and there is a nationwide labour shortage. The hospitality and food service industries are experiencing an all-time high in job vacancies, over 89,000 vacancies. In manufacturing and construction, we're over 60,000 job vacancies. And in the retail sector, we're seeing over 84,000 unfulfilled jobs. How will this bill address those vacancies? The Business Development Bank of Canada has reported that 64% of Canadian businesses say that labour shortages are limiting their growth. These labour shortages are severely impacting the ability of Canadian businesses to recover from COVID-19. And as a result, our economic recovery in Canada is stalling. And I see nothing in Bill C-2 that will address or alleviate these rampant job vacancies across the country. Now, getting back to the specifics of C-2, I think it's positive that the government is taking a more targeted approach to pandemic stimulus. And I've been calling for that in this House for the past year. And it is critical that the industries that are the most impacted, like tourism, hospitality, and travel, get the resources that they need so we can ensure job creation, retention, and a strong economic rebound. That being said, I'm deeply concerned that this government is seeking to fast-track this legislation before the House of Commons has even convened its Finance Committee to undertake a review of this legislation. Given how flawed some of the pandemic spending, and I like how one of the Liberals who spoke earlier did admit that their programs weren't perfect, we have seen that there have been negative consequences created. And now, shouldn't the government be welcoming strong oversight from opposition parties to ensure the strongest possible legislation? Now, here are a few examples of how previous pandemic spending was flawed. I had constituents reach out to me who needed to access the CERB. They were seniors who aren't used to using a computer. Now, instead of accessing their benefits through the Canada Revenue Agency portal, they fell prey to a third-party group that promised to process their benefits for them. Now, in fact, the Competition Bureau of Canada is investigating one such firm for suspected deceptive, false, and misleading practices that saw Canadians lose out on 8 to 10% of their entitled benefits. These constituents, when accessing the website of this third party, believed that they were being assisted in accessing benefits directly from the government. The reality was that they were accessing these benefits through a deceptively designed website that charged significant fees for their services. And those who didn't want to pay those fees were subject to an aggressive collections campaign that threatened to ruin their credit scores. Why did the government design this legislation? To allow unscrupulous businesses to benefit on the backs of unaware Canadians. Why was it that when I raised my concerns with a minister that I was told, well, it's not illegal? Now, we've heard multiple times already that prisoners, suspected fraudsters, members of organized crime have accessed pandemic benefits, and that there is no plan from this government to recoup those monies. Canadians are furious that this has happened, and they want a full accounting for those funds and a plan to ensure that this abuse does not happen again. So far, I don't see that with this legislation, and so it's critical that we bring the Finance Committee back into session so we can thoroughly examine this bill. Enough is enough. The trust that opposition parties gave to this government in the last Parliament to fast-track legislation for pandemic benefits has been abused. This is unacceptable, and it demonstrates the need for a thorough study by the Finance Committee before moving forward and passing this bill. And once we are assured that this due diligence has been done, we can move expeditiously to ensure that Canadians who need their benefits can get them. And I know many in the hospitality industry and the independent travel agent sector who desperately do need support to keep their businesses alive until we can get through this pandemic. So in closing, Madam Speaker, we have seen how well-intelligent spending designed to help Canadians who are in need can be misused or used by those who don't really need it. And it's critically important that we get the Finance Committee in order so that we can thoroughly study this bill to ensure that spending goes where it's needed and not contribute to further rising inflation that we see in this country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires.